Good morning. I'm Rose Stevenson, Director of Policy and Strategy at HEPI, the Higher Education Policy Institute. And I'm really pleased to welcome you to this webinar, launching our latest report, Rethinking Student Voice: How can higher education design effective student governance? So we've got an hour for today's webinar, and my job is to talk as little as possible. So you've got plenty of time to hear from our panel, as well as being able to ask questions. So if you do have questions, please drop them into the chat. When we get to the Q&A, we will go through as many questions as we can, and we'll switch your mic on so you can ask your question to the panel. If that doesn't work for you, just put a note next to your question and I will put your question to the panel. So we are going to kick off today by hearing about the findings of the report. And I'm so pleased that we're joined by Darcie Jones, who was an intern at HEPI this summer and authored the report. Prior to working with us, Darcie was a sabbatical officer for 2 years at the University of Plymouth Students' Union, and Darcie has recently taken up a role at Plymouth as an assistant wellbeing advisor. So we're really pleased to have her back with us this morning and to hear more about your work, Darcie. So over to you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Rose. And firstly, I'd like to extend a huge thank you to the HEPI team, colleagues in higher education, and the interviewees that gave up their time to support me in writing this report. Without all of these people, this report wouldn't be what it is. So thank you so much. So yeah, the purpose of this report explores how student voice is or isn't currently embedded in higher education governance and what can change to enable student governors to genuinely influence decision making. Why is this report needed? We're in the biggest financial crisis in recent higher education history, with 43% of institutions forecasted to be in a deficit in the year 24-25. Students are central stakeholders in that crisis, yet are often the quietest voice in the boardroom. When they are in the room, they're expected to be the voice of thousands, sometimes tens of thousands, while holding full legal responsibility. So what this report aims to ask is this fair on students or even institutions? And how can we design governance systems that genuinely empower students? This report had 3 key findings in terms of core problems. Core problem A is the recruitment and induction often unintentionally sets students up to struggle. Students are often unaware of the governor role in the sabbatical officer portfolio. Training is often inconsistent, passive, and frequently relies on external programs that lack institutional context. And the consequence of that is students start on the back foot and they're overwhelmed and unsure on how to be effective. Core problem B is board culture, power, and relationships largely shape whether students feel heard. Students often feel that they lack the cultural capital within the boardroom. They don't understand political or boardroom lingo, as some would call it, and the unwritten rules of communication. The culture can also expect conformity and discourage challenge in some boardrooms. Chairs also play a significant role. Supportive chairs empower students, while unsupportive cultures silence them. And diversity gaps largely matter. Boards remain disproportionately older, white, and able-bodied, which impacts students and governors in general's sense of belonging on the board. And then finally, core problem C is student voice is often present, but not potentially influential. Students report their role feeling symbolic rather than influential. Interviewees highlighted multiple cases of pre-screening of student comments and questions before board meetings, making student contributions stage managed. Students, especially those from underrepresented backgrounds, feel pressured to use personal vulnerability as currency in order to have their voices heard. Also, committees, where, as many of us know, is where the discussion and the decision making largely takes place, are often lacking in student contribution, with some boards not including students at all within their committee spaces. The result of this is students become ghost governors. They're present but don't often have any influence. So the recommendations from this report recommend a key number of things, one of which being clarity and transparency within recruitment, including clear communication during SU elections, Aligned collaborative training between the institution and the student union, not siloed approaches that often double up on training. Skills matrices, including students. Largely, these are done for external governors, but including students is key within this. It identifies gaps and helps support and development. Inclusive board cultures are key, tackling jargon, unwritten rules, and informal norms. Student membership on committee and making sure they're in the room where discussions happen is also key. Structured opportunities for students to lead discussions, not just respond to discussions, is also very key. Another one, which is very widely spoken about within the sector and is slowly making progress, is diversifying of boards and also the exploration of remuneration to widen access into boards. And then finally, sector-wide expectations of better demographic data to help us figure out where we actually need to make progress in terms of diversifying boards, which includes including socio-economic data of governors' backgrounds. So finally, you may look at this and think it would be easier to just not have students on boards at all. But it's really key to note that their role is so important within university governance. Their role brings immediacy, authenticity, and lived experience that boards cannot get elsewhere. But presence alone is not enough. We need structures that turn presence into power. So for this report, challenges institutions to move from symbolic inclusion to genuine partnership with students in decision making. And after that, I will pass back on to Rose. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Darcie, so much. Darcie, I've got a couple of quick questions for you before we go to the panel, if that's okay. So something that we talked about a fair bit when you were writing the report was whether some of these issues just apply to student governors or whether actually a lot of them apply to new governors in general. And I wondered what your thoughts were about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a key thing to note, which is noted in this report, is that a lot of these issues aren't just subject to student governors. A lot of governors feel them, whether they are experienced governors that have been in boardrooms their entire career, or if they're new governors and it's their first time on a board. It is largely felt by a wide variety of governors, but this report does just look on those student governors. But by embedding these recommendations, you do largely help the whole board, not just students.
Brilliant. And I wonder if you came across any examples where someone was doing student governance really well, they had really good setup, or where student governors had a particularly big impact on an institution.
Yeah, so there was one example which is mentioned in this report that was at Hartbury, in which at the time it was a further education college, and a student governor was one so influential within the boardroom, but also had developed such a what's the word I'm looking for, kind of a sense of purpose within the university and really felt so aligned to the university that to gain a degree, they wanted to gain a Hartbury degree, not one from an awarding power from a different institution. So they suggested to Hartbury to become a university and have degree awarding powers, in which now Hartbury does, which I think shows just how influential both students can be on the board, but also how when you empower students and student governance, kind of how empowered you can make them feel that they make such a huge change like that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to hear from our panel who will share their reflections on the report. So first up, we have Patrick Young, who is a leading UK media executive and chair of council at Cardiff University. Then we'll hear from Professor Stephen Jones, who's a higher education scholar at the University of Manchester, and whose research examines university governance and how that operates in practice. And Stephen authored last week's HEPI report on ethical governance in universities. He will be followed by Dr. Simon Meacher, Head of Executive and Governance Office at the fantastic Newcastle University. And last but definitely not least, particularly today, we will hear from Favour Samuel, President of the University of Nottingham Students' Union and an LLM graduate in International Human Rights Law. Okay, Patrick, over to you.
Darcie for the report. I'm Pat Young. I'm the chair of Cardiff University's governing body, the council. I'm also a former student union president and a former NUS vice president. And so student voice has always mattered for me, and it matters a lot at Cardiff University. Every year I meet the incoming sabbaticals. I take them out for lunch on my dime, and we have a conversation, which is fundamentally the university wants to work with them and we want to collaborate with them, but we also respect the fact that they have to represent their members' views. And that means that, the university's position and their position may not always be aligned. And all I ask is that in that situation, we find reasonable ways of working through whatever the issues are. But I do not expect them to always agree with the university position. I expect them to represent their members' interests, and then we'll deal with the consequences of where that takes us. As a university, we have students on, I think, pretty much every committee. The only exception that comes to mind is REMCO. We even have students on our Vice Chancellor selection panel. We make sure all of our new governors, all of our new councillors, including students, go through an induction process, which goes through the structure of governance, goes through the committees, goes through strategy, goes through the KPIs. We try to demystify the language, but I'm not going to pretend that at times people don't drift into acronym sort of hell. But I would say that's as much a challenge for the lay members of the committees as it is for the students. I make myself available, as does our Pro Vice Chancellor for Education and Student Experience, to help demystify some of the committee papers. I'm always available to our student, well, or any of our committee members who want to understand, is there a background to this paper? And we treat our student governors as equals. They have equal standing. I mean, university councils are often a selection, a couple of people from Senate, a couple of people from the non-professorial staff, students, everyone there is an equal. The only difference is our student union has guaranteed agenda time in every council meeting, and they set the agenda for that section of the meeting. Could be 15 minutes, could be half an hour, as well as the other stuff that we discuss around education, student experience. The student union itself always has agenda time at our council meetings and in our development days to put forward issues they want to talk about. Beyond the big formal committees, don't forget we also have course reps, and we put a lot of investment into supporting our course reps across the university. The university also runs focus groups and pulse surveys on sort of major change programs to try and get input from students. The Vice Chancellor often does a Q&A directly with the student body. But I'd say in sort of closing my remarks here that sometimes, the student reps find themselves as the jam in the sandwich. I'm thinking back particularly to the marking and assessment boycott that we had a couple of years ago, where the students want to support their academics, and at the same time, their members want to graduate. And I think as governors, we just have to accept that the student union in particular finds itself in a difficult situation there. And we just have to respect that, the situation that they find themselves in and try and help them navigate it. But universities would be a much poorer place without student voice. And we do everything we can, we believe, to make that voice effective.
Brilliant. Thank you, Patrick. So student governors are the jam in the sandwich. I really appreciated Patrick's clear description of being very open with students that they don't have to agree with the university line, but also for the university recognizing that when the union is perhaps in a difficult position, that they might need some support in that direction as well. Really helpful. Okay, Stephen, what are your reflections on the report, please?
I think the report's brilliant, and I think that's the first thing to say. I think it's a really important report. And I'm going to pick up on a couple of aspects that relate to research I've been doing around university governance in the last few years. And the argument I want to make picks up on your first question, Rose, to Darcie, which is, are these issues unique to student governors or are they broader? Because I think there is a slight danger here that we exceptionalize student governors and we create a kind of deficit model or a deficit discourse around student governors. I actually see things the other way around. I think student governors have got the potential to be much more influential when it comes to university governance in a way that would benefit their institutions and benefit the whole sector. And I actually think good student governance is just good governance in general. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how I arrived at that view and try and share some of the data that I collected through interviews with student governors, which I think is broadly consistent with the data that Darcie collected. So my own background, I started off as a school governor in Manchester about 20 years ago, got interested in university governance, got onto the board of governors at Manchester University for 3 or 4 years, became interested from a research point of view in governance elsewhere, started talking to governance. The field of governance I find endlessly fascinating because it's a powerful field, but within this country it's also a secretive field, and often the dynamics are not appropriate, and sometimes the rules of the game are maybe only understood by the few rather than the many. So it's also a place of immense...
Sorry to interrupt you. Your camera has gone off, which we can hear you perfectly clearly, but we can't. There we go.
Am I back? Sorry, I don't know how that happened, or it might have been an improvement. I don't know. Yeah, so thanks, Rose. So I think university governing bodies are places of significant unleashed potential, because I think they could be a real positive force. And a lot of the work that I do within the sector is trying to encourage university governing bodies to come out of the shadows and be more confident and advocate more on behalf of the sector and be a first line of defence for the sector. So I've been writing about university governance for some time, and most recently I was commissioned by the Council for the Defence of British Universities to do some research. It's called Views from the Inside. You can find the report online, and we spoke to current and former governors at over 40 institutions in the UK. Governance is hard to research because everyone's got different language, different processes, different rules. Most of the governors we spoke to said they enjoyed their experience. They found it a bit thankless at times. It was a lot of time and effort, but most said at the end they weren't able to make the contribution that they wanted to make. And there were recurring themes that came up. This is from all the people we spoke to, not just the student governors. I'll come on to the student governors in a moment. But people were concerned that there was too much coziness between the senior governors and senior managers. In other words, that separation that's required so that governors can hold managers to account and provide robust challenge wasn't always there. People worried that there were in-groups that emerged, cliques. We heard from one student that there was a WhatsApp group that the lay governors were members of, but student governors weren't allowed to have membership of. People talked about processes, which Darcie's mentioned. One of our student governors said they weren't just unclear at times, they were deliberately unclear as a mechanism to minimize resistance to what the authorized line was on the governing body. We heard evidence from people who said meetings were sometimes stage managed, which was an expression Darcie used, and also people described pre-screening, particularly of student and staff comments. In other words, if you're a staff or student member, you had to have your contribution checked first. The agenda was inaccessible, though it's reassuring to hear what Pat said in that respect, and students were ghosted. So they were ghost students in some cases, but I think it's better to think of it as a process of ghosting, because a lot of students were able to give examples of how they were systematically marginalized. Membership and recruitment processes were unclear. Some people felt the processes were circular, so you didn't get a new injection of ideas into the board as often as would be necessary. The biggest surprise probably in that piece of research was that the critique that emerged from lay governors was actually as sharp as a critique that emerged from staff and students. And this is why I'm a little bit worried that we might exceptionalize student governors, because actually there are a lot of lay governors who spoke to us, not the ones who are chairing the subcommittees or chair of the main board, more junior lay governors who said they didn't really understand what was going on. They never really felt they were in the right group. They didn't know when to speak or how to speak. They struggled with the culture of university governance and the structures that were in place. Okay, in terms of what was said specifically by student governors, first of all, there was a lot of positivity. Student governors appreciated being round the table. They felt it was really important for the student voice or student voices to be heard, and they enjoyed being able to represent that. Many student governors found it personally developmental. They grew in confidence. They got something for their CV. They developed as people. One of them said, it's fascinating to witness big decisions being taken. You feel like at the heart, you feel like you're at the heart of what's going on. A recurring complaint was that 1 or 2 years wasn't long enough. And that was a recurring theme. Lay governors said even 3 or 4 years wasn't good enough because they found some of the processes so complex that it took them longer to work out the processes and what their place was than they were allowed. Some student governors really reported feeling patronized within the meeting. So one of our interviewees said, it's okay if you're talking about student issues like some new mental health support initiative, but if you have an opinion about the bigger issues, strategy, finance, estates, you get shut down pretty sharpish. And I think that's a tension, that's a question. According to the Office for Students, student governors have exactly the same rights and responsibilities on the Board of Governors as any other members, but often they're positioned as consultees rather than decision makers, and often they are told to, or they get the message that they need to keep in their lane. Power dynamics, which Darcie talks about, a lot of people found it intimidating. A lot of the people on the board are older white men in, as one person said, expensive suits, and they'll let you know that they know best. There was examples of misunderstandings. So this is one of the issue, partly because of the age profile of governors, which thanks to Heath's data, we know that most governors are in their late 50s or early 60s. They experienced university very differently. And what one student governor told us was, when they talk to lay governors, the lay governors would reminisce about their time at university, and they'd talk about things like drinking in the student bars and rag weeks and local sporting competitions with other universities, but they wouldn't really understand that for students today, it's mostly around working part-time in order to survive, trying to meet deadlines for academic work. So there seemed to be a huge cultural gap between the discourse of the board and the lived experience of students and student governors. There was a lot of feedback about induction, which was considered problematic. There was a lot of conversations about the positioning of students, and some people were concerned that students were positioned as one person said, as pound signs, and the student governor would say to her board, we're not just, you can't think of us this way, this is about education, it's a place of education, and they'd be told, oh yes, sorry, that's really inappropriate, but then 10 minutes later the same discourse was recurring. And finally, a lot of our students talked about co-optation. So one said, well, the VC and the team and the chair were really supportive, so long as your agenda matched their agenda. So they wanted things like co-written statements, matching visions, and student governors were felt to be co-opted and therefore not able to always speak as freely as they might do. Having said that, student governors were brilliant at finding spaces to get their voices heard. They developed strategies, they built networks, often with staff governors, they produced reports, they mobilized around the key issues, and they had lots of mechanisms in place to make sure that despite the structures, they were actually able to make a meaningful difference and not just be consultees. We wanted to turn this critique into a positive contribution. So last week we published our ethical code of university governance. There is already a code written by the CUC, the Committee of University Chairs, but that's very much written by the chairs of governing bodies for the chairs of governing bodies. And what we wanted to do is capture the voice and the perspective of all members of governing bodies, especially student members. So we had a big consultation, and it was interesting to see the views of students, particularly in relation to things like membership and power dynamics. Obviously, there are still some things which are contested. The composition of the governing body, for example, some students felt there should be more student members so they weren't isolated. There were issues about the financialization of university governance. So whilst some student governors felt as though the educational purpose of the university was sometimes obscured, others noted that universities were big organizations with big budgets. But the positioning of students within the new code, I think, is significant because they're central, and other codes, other education-based codes already do this. So we looked at the Scottish Code of University Governance, which is much more progressive in terms of how it positions students, and the FE Code further education, which begins with the following: the board is student-centric, the board puts students first, the board embraces the student voice and ensures that it underpins strategy. These are ways of thinking about governance that more explicitly place students at the heart of governance and don't take the assumption, or that aren't based on the assumption that they need to be especially included. That's what we want to carry on building on, and I think it's entirely consistent with Darcie's brilliant report today. Thanks, Rose.
Thank you so much, Stephen. I thought it was interesting what you said about the cliques and the private WhatsApp groups, which are quite concerning. I was told by a former chair of a university, and I will emphasise that they are no longer a chair of a university, that when he was in charge, most of the decisions were made in the gentlemen's toilets, which, as a governor who spends absolutely no time in the gentlemen's toilets, was a bit concerning. We have got questions coming in, folks, which is great. Do upvote the questions you want to be asked first, because I will ask them on that basis. Simon, over to you.
Yeah, hi, morning everybody. I'm Simon Meacher. I'm Head of Executive and Governance Office at Newcastle University. Some terrific points been made by members of the panel already. I know that Favour will go on to do the same. Just a bit about my background, mainly in educational governance for a while here at Newcastle, so supported a great deal of committees, attended too many meetings than I care to remember, and been supporting our governing board here and also the senior leadership team since around 2017. And during all of that time, you know, I've worked with a range of really talented sabbatical officers, deeply impressive individuals who constantly amaze me. And I really welcome this report. I think it's going to be immensely valuable for the sector. I will be making essential reading for our board members here at Newcastle. And really what we're talking about is, with the report, is helping early career professionals to maximise their impact, and what's not to like about that, basically. So I think that we've got a lot to learn from the findings. Some really interesting ideas have been touched on already. But one of the things that really interests and motivates me is board culture. And I'll say a bit now about what we've been doing at Newcastle, because an example of that does feature in the report. And my overriding message with it really is about the value of getting together to talk, all governors getting together to talk without an agenda, provided it's still a structured and meaningful engagement, of course. So we had a recommendation in an external governance review a few years ago to look at providing more tailored support for different categories of governor. So particularly thinking about our student governors, how should we integrate them better? And we were also conscious that for many of our board members, particularly the lay governors, their only exposure to the student voice was traditionally through the traditional two student governors on the committee. So we wanted to try and fashion more opportunities for all governors to get together. So we came up with this solution of staging speed networking session. We're now into our third year of doing that. And that's really a chance for all governors to try and find out more about what makes each other tick, what's important to one another, and what difference the university makes to the student life and the student experience. It supports mutual understanding of roles. And I think also it's really important that our council sees student spaces and is also seen in those spaces. So we staged the session in the Students' Union. So we run that after a meeting of council. So we've got a kind of a captive audience, if you like, into our third year, as I say. All members of our council and other student union representatives recognise that that's a really positive feature of the calendar. They see the benefits of it. And I think it's just tremendously helpful in integrating members of the board. Another thing to say about it is that it was the idea was realised jointly between ourselves as a governance team and also the sabbatical officers at the time, and we plan and arrange that session together. So it's empowering in that sense too, I think. I'll make a shout out for governance professionals. I think they've got, I know that the report talks about chairs of boards, but I think governance professionals, those who do a lot of the work behind the scenes for governing boards, have a really significant role here too. Another thing that we've introduced in the last couple of years to support our student governors is pre-meetings before each meeting of council. So that's an opportunity to talk about the papers, because by that stage they've gone out. Explore opportunities for questions. So it's not about screening questions, but just talk informally about where the student governors might be able to challenge or have input. And also for me as a governance professional and someone who supports the senior management team as well, to offer context, offer a bit of insight, do some jargon busting. And I think those are working very well, and they're mutually beneficial, but ultimately it comes back to that idea about supporting the student governors to maximise their impact.
Brilliant, thank you. Really good to hear that practice is taking place at Newcastle, and I love the idea of taking the governors to the SU. It sounds so simple when you say it, but I expect it's quite impactful. Okay, so finally we're going to hear from Favour, who is living student governance. Over to you, Favour.
Hi everyone, good morning. Thank you so much, Rosie and HEPI, for this wonderful opportunity. It's such a huge, privilege that I don't take for granted. So thank you, and thank you to each and everyone who has, been a part of this. My name is Favour Samuel, and I am the president of the University of Nottingham Students' Union, and I'm also a lawyer by training. And upon receiving this invite and thinking about, the topic, which, just spans on student governance and how student governance can make impact, I asked myself two questions. What is it exactly that I want to drive as a student governor myself, and use myself as a testament to this very topic? And two things came to my mind, and I circled student governor and maximum impact. And one thing that I want to drive in today's meeting is that we as student governors, first of all, need to see ourselves as transformational leaders, because that's what we are. We are the people, we are the conduit that basically bridge the gap between university and students. And because students are the very much center of what exactly makes or breaks the university, however you want to look at a university, either a financial institution or an educational institution, depending on how you look at it, students are the very middle and important piece that makes and breaks the university. And for me, I thought about impact, that how can we basically gauge what impact is? And it all comes down to student governors being very much proud to believe in themselves, being very much, able to trust that this position that they've been given in is something that they need to, use to be able to better the lives of students, to be able to improve the student experience, to improve student belonging, and to improve student mattering. And there's always one thing that happens when you're in a room. As much as, yes, we're student governors and we have a seat at the table, another thing that comes to mind is basically you can be in a room and still not have impact. And for the longest of times, we always see student governors as the fact that they're already in the room, there's a student there, they're representatives of the student body, that already is progress, or that should be celebrated. While that is true, it should be celebrated, I believe that we need to go one step further by being honest with ourselves and saying being present and having impact are two different things. You can sit in a room and still not shape what happens. You can be consulted and still be a periphery to the actual decision. That's not impact, that's just presence. Student governors should be afforded the chance to be able to speak up and show up. and, be confident in themselves to be able to challenge decisions. And I know so many times a lot of governors rather, are not very comfortable when you start challenging decisions or you start inquiring on why things are done. And I wanted to put it to you, I put it out there right now that it's important that we are given a space to ask these questions, because as I said earlier on, we are a conduit to be able to pass whatever students are saying, their voice, in those rooms. So it's important that we're always, asking those questions, and don't be shy of asking those questions. Don't be afraid of asking those questions. Those questions are necessary for you to get clarity, as Darcie said, clarity and transparency. Those are very, very much vital tools that council needs to be able to project, and student governors need to be able to see that they can carry on back to, the students on issues that, that are very much pressing, especially right now that, we are such in a very intense financial pressure where universities are going into, unfortunately, deficits and all of that. And I just also want to say that it's important that, students keep on pushing the limit, keep on asking those questions, keep on, seeing themselves as who they really are, which is transformational leaders, which are leaders that need to be in those rooms to make those decisions. And if I have to digress a bit, what is a transformational leader? A transformational leader is someone who inspires, who motivates, who is able to ask the questions that no one wants to ask, who is able to say, I need to see something that I can give back to my constituents, I can give back to the people who have put me in this position. Because this position that we're in is a trust, and we need to be able to be accountable to the people who have put us there. So if it means that when we're in council or whatever we are in, or committees, and it looks like they're taking students out of the picture, we need to bring them back to the focal point, which is students. Students are the epicenter of everything that makes a university. And that, I believe, is how we can make maximum impact, by being strong, by being bold, by being confident, and believing in yourself, that for the fact that I'm in this position as a student governor, it means that people have seen something in me that makes me have the power to change the narrative, to shift culture. And if you already catch that from your mind, you can be able to do, and change so much in those rooms to give students, everything and anything that they are seeking for, as well as the fact that you wear many hats. You're not only a student governor, you're also a student yourself. So you understand what it is, the issues and the stress that students face on a daily, especially in the particular institution. And it is those things that you carry on into council or carry into committee that you need to be able to voice out, and then be strong and be bold. Because to be honest, those people actually like it and they commend you when you're bold enough to be able to challenge and to be able to ask those questions. So when you're like that, you're actually getting the answers that students really want, because there is that gap between university decision making and the way students understand what's going on.
That's amazing, Favour. Thank you so much. I've written down student governors are transformational leaders, and I think that's what Darcie's report is trying to get to. I certainly have worked with student governors who've turned up and they are a transformational leader on day one. They're ready and they have those skills of resilience that you talked about. But I think it's about building that framework so that all students can feel that that's where they are and that's what their role is. So we are going to crack on with some questions. So I'd invite all of my colleagues to pop their cameras back on. Mike Ratcliffe is our first question. Hopefully we can get you unmuted, Mike, and you can put your question to the panel.
Thank you. So I'm really taken with the idea of including student governors in the skills matrix. I think it's a really good idea, because I think it plays to that sense that sometimes you assume that the student is just an elected person and that's just a completely blank slate. And we're kind of ignoring the experiences and skills that the student representative has already, but also that they've actually studied something in depth, probably for 3 years, and they've probably got a lot to bring just from that. So that's not just saying, we've got a student who's done a law degree, we'll outsource all the law decisions to them. But there's just a kind of interesting thing of recognizing what that student brings. And I think the skills matrix idea is great. So it's just a comment welcoming that. And I think that's a good idea.
Great, thank you. I'm going to pass to Patrick and then to Simon to comment on students being included in the skills matrix. And there's an anonymous question asking, or stating there's a difference between representation and membership. Are any new models of student membership on governing bodies emerging other than the standard elected student sabbatical officer? So Darcie and Favour, I will ask you to comment on that. So students in the skills matrix, Patrick. Oh, you're still muted there, Patrick.
Sorry, I'm looking at my phone to look at last year's skills matrix, and our student governors were included in the skills matrix. So I'm glad that that's already happening. It is a good idea.
Great. Simon?
Well, I wholeheartedly support the recommendation and idea, and look to take that forward within this institution, if at all possible, and echo what Mike has just said as well. I mean, we've tended to think and look on our schools matrix as a tool for use during recruitment of lay members, and this is really sort of scales falling from eyes moment. Because I think you absolutely must be recognising the skills and experience of the board membership in its entirety.
Brilliant, thank you. So Darcie, the next question was around kind of membership versus representation. And you talk quite a bit in your report about how does a student governor end up on the board, and is it always an elected SAB? So maybe you could give us a rundown.
Yeah, so as has been mentioned, one of the most popular ways of having students on the board is by a sabbatical officer. I think a large majority of institutions take up that post. But there are also other ways in which it's done. There are institutions that have students that are currently kind of acting students on their board, and they're usually brought onto the board in one of two ways. They either apply for the role through a traditional application process in the way in which a lay or an external governor would, or there are some institutions, one of which being Cambridge, that do similarly to a sabbatical officer role. Student governors are elected to be a student governor, so not a sabbatical officer, they are just a student governor. All of which comes with their pros and their cons. As is mentioned within my report, I recommend that institutions, and I guess, broaden their perspectives around the ways in which they recruit students, because it's not a one-size-fits-all process, and that's completely okay if you think your institution actually would be better off with students that are currently studying as student governors, or if they'd be better off with sabbatical officers. I think especially for institutions that are very small, there are some student unions that their student union is one sabbatical officer, in which they already have such a workload and lack of capacity that I'm sure if you ask them honestly and privately, they say they don't have the capacity to feel like they can truly represent students within a boardroom. In cases like that, it may be a case that students that are currently students are the best people to sit on those boards. One example I did see in one institution, and annoyingly, I wish I noted it down because I can't remember what institution it was that alongside a student governor, kind of as a support and someone, I guess, that understands the university, is also an alumni governor. So that's not only a student that's studied at the university, and not a student that studied at the university 30 years ago when it was maybe quite a bit different. It's a student that is quite recently graduated, usually within about 5 years, that has an understanding of generally the student body of the university, of some of kind of the previous history of the university, that are there to both be a governor, but it does also support student governors in their role of representing the student voice on the board.
Brilliant. Yeah, I know the University of the Built Environment has a trainee program for their alumni. So they're training their alumni through their own board to go out and be board members elsewhere, which I think is incredibly powerful for the impact of their institution. Favour, is there a tension between being in the role, being a governor of an institution, and the expectation of representing the whole student body?
Oh, certainly. I believe so. And just as something that I can use myself as an example, every time you step into council, you wear many hats. And, you're not just a student governor. Well, for those who are active students, you're also a student, or you are not an active student any longer. And sometimes when students get to know that you are part of council, or you're part of committees that are going to shape decisions that will impact the university, there comes a lot of pressure with that. And it's very important that, first of all, you as a governor be able to be calm and have people that can support you to be able to deal with that. As well as when you step into council, you step into those meetings, it's important that you also realize that these people put you in those positions because they believe that you can do it. So there is that representation where you need to represent thousands of voices that have elected you to be their voice, as well as membership. So there is a play with both of them, because you also need to be able to vote for something that will definitely impact the lives of students. So there is a lot of tension, because you also want to represent them well and vote for something that will obviously impact and make lives better, make students' lives better, make the experience better. So I believe that student governors are not consultants. We're not asking for a seat at the table to advise and influence. We are asking that we are part of those rooms, and we are already, because you're not only a student governor, you're a member of council. So you wear those different hats, that when you sit down in council, you're making decisions with the back of your mind, when the students are part of it. Students are the people that are going to be affected by it. And also by being a representative of those same people that you are voting for. So, yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, we're going to take a couple more questions. One from Matthew Patterson, and then Andrew Boggs, please. So Matthew.
Thank you, and thank you to all the panelists. So as context, I'm a student officer, I'm a sabbatical officer. So Stephen discussed the length of membership on governing bodies and how long it can be for processes to take, which can delay outcomes. So the question to everyone, I suppose, is given the turnover of those student officers, even when lay members, often with double or triple the time, feel as though they haven't accomplished anything, how can officers have an impact and feel that they have an impact? Favour talked a lot about being a transformational leader. So I suppose the question is sort of, how can you be a transformational leader without then seeing that transformation?
Really brilliant question, Matthew. Thank you. And Andrew Boggs.
In the interest of full disclosure, I'm University Secretary at Royal Holloway University, so no Matthew well, so I'll be interested in the response to that question. The question I had, actually, Simon's already touched on it, to be honest, and it was about activities that can be taken almost in the margins of council or other governing body meetings to help ensure that student governors or other student representatives in other areas, such as academic boards or councils, etc., how they can hit the ground running and be effective members of those bodies. And Simon, I do something quite similar at Royal Holloway, and I expect colleagues across the sector do this, of having a special meeting with the student representatives, particularly early on in the year, to walk them through the agenda once it's been published, to help give them a bit of a leg up in terms of understanding of issues that may have come to a council or a board 2 or 3 times already, but they're seeing it for the first time. Again, in the interest of full disclosure, I do this with all new board members, all new council members as well. So it's not restricted to the students, but that there needs to be a separate meeting with the students so that they can ask the questions that they may not be comfortable asking in a fuller meeting. I was just curious, one, if Darcie had come across that as common practice across the sector, and because I expect various institutions may do it in different ways, and interested in the other panelists if they had similar experiences at their institutions.
Great, thank you. So we've got this question about how to be impactful in a short time, and Stephen, I might ask you to comment on that. And Favour, I don't know if you've been a SAB for 2 years. I'd be interested to hear. No, just 1. Okay, so if you were going to be a SAB again next year, so you had 2 years, would that feel different, do you think? So maybe we'll do that question first.
Yeah. I'm not, I just started, 6 months into the role, and it has been a very, very, impactful journey, I must say. And to your question about basically how me talking about being a transformational leader, but the university cannot really see that transformation. I think it all comes down to council culture, basically. The culture of council already needs to see that student governors are very much important in that room, because they are as I said earlier on, the conduit between the student voice and the way decisions are being taken in those rooms. Council culture needs to change if it hasn't, or needs to be, improved, to the point where they see that student governors need membership to actually be transformational. And if they can't see that, then that's where the problem is. That's where we need to change the way it should be. And I'm not saying that you should be the one to do that. You could possibly send a message to the chair of council, or try to have a meeting with your vice chancellor saying, these are the things that I've noted, being a member of council, or being a student governor on council or committee. And I believe that it's important that we review these things. So it all starts with the culture on council. If it's not enabling students to be able to speak up, to be able to show up, and to be able to stay in their power and be authentic whilst advocating for change, then there's a problem there. So I understand what you mean by saying that how can I be a transformational if the university cannot see the transformation? The transformation needs to start from council. If that culture is not there, it needs to change. If it has to do with the review of the way the culture has been and possibly improved, then it needs to be done. So yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. Stephen, how can boards structure themselves or have a culture so that students can have that impact in a short time?
Yeah, I think structure's the important word here. And Matthew's question is really important because it captures how the structure we've got at the moment in some ways is loaded against student governors, because they're only getting 1 or 2 years to make a difference, whereas lay governors are getting much longer. I think the way the conversation's going is really encouraging, because we're talking about ways in which the whole governing body can recognise the value of what students bring, rather than placing the emphasis on students to change in terms of what their contribution is. So while I think training for students is important for all of the reasons that have been mentioned, I think we also maybe need to think about training for chairs of governing boards, so they can actually build the culture and have the structures in place that make students front and center of what they do. And I think, people have mentioned the challenges, financial challenges for the sector at the moment, but the real question for me is, when there are difficult decisions to be made by a governing body, when there is a deficit, when there are potential redundancies, when you're looking at course closures, what systems do you have in place to use student governors and tap into their wealth of experience and knowledge and insight to inform those decisions? In other words, how do you get those decisions out of the gents' toilets, as you said before, Rose?
Absolutely. Patrick?
Sorry, just briefly. I think as a governor, as a councillor, you're in the business of stewardship. Yeah, we've just taken some big decisions on academic shape and size at Cardiff University. I've got a 4-year term. Some of those will not be finished even within my 4-year term. So what you have to try and do is impact the decisions that come through during your period in office and make them as impactful as possible. I think as a chair, we have external reviews of governance. They are very good, independent ways of looking at, is everybody involved? And also as chair, sometimes you just have to give up power. We give up power on our agenda for every council meeting for the student union or the student representatives to have their say. We also have away days, which are less pressured in terms of the governance and assurance and all of the other things that you need to do. And again, we give the student union time on every single away day to set the agenda of things they want the council to know about, hear about, discuss.
Brilliant. I'm aware that folk want to come in and speak, but I'd like to get to another question if possible. So Darcie, quick fire answer on training and kind of ongoing training for students. How you was that playing out in the sector in your research, but also that tension between training and what is perceived to be or potentially is seen as screening?
Yeah, so I think one of the key things to know, and which kind of has come up in this conversation, is there is a difference between that pre-screening and pre-meeting. I think Simon explained it very well, in which the way in which their pre-meets work it's a genuine meeting and a space to create a open and a safe space for students to ask questions that they wouldn't necessarily be comfortable asking within a boardroom, especially key for those that are either young or come from a background in which they're not used to those spaces. And to a student governor, and probably also even a lay governor, feels like a stupid question. And often, if they probably did ask it in the room, there'd be other people that think, oh, thank God you asked it, because we were too scared to. But sadly, those spaces currently just aren't comfortable for people to be able to ask those questions. So pre-meeting is ensuring that you create those safe spaces. Pre-screening, which I have seen and I have heard from students about, is in which they take their questions or their concerns based off of the agenda or the papers, and then in which university executives take that and either find them an answer or resolve that outside of the meeting, in order to minimize that conversation within a meeting and to minimize concern within the meeting. Or students in some cases are heavily advised to not bring up that topic, or to significantly reword the way in which they bring up that topic, to be, maybe some would say, a lot more diplomatic. So yeah, I just wanted to note they are very different things, but I can completely see how they could be confusing and could be seen as one in the same.
I'm going to stop you there, Darcie, because I want to go on to the next question, but thank you. I mean, again, it's really interesting, that tension between being critical and being constructive, and how you manage that in this environment. Okay, we are going to hear from Aisha. Aisha, if you can keep your questions super short, and we will get you a super short answer before we wrap up.
Hi, yes, thank you all. This report aligns closely with my research. I'm a PhD student at Imperial, and I'm looking how, students perceive accountability and transparency and trust within institutional decision-making, how it aligns or diverges with, governance actors and institutional leaders. So a question to the panel is, we often see a difference between, how governance is intended by leaders versus how it is perceived and experienced by students. So on your experiences, what is the one initiative or even an idea that you had in your mind that you would like to see that institutions could start to create these open and honest conversations between students and early governors, I would say, about how they feel, how governance is in practice, in a way that genuinely shares power and make it safe for both sides to speak, rather than just simply collecting data and, putting it on a piece of paper?
Brilliant. That is a great last question. So we're going to go around to each of the panelists, kind of 1 to 2 sentences on the one thing that you could do to create those safe spaces between students, and in particular, governors that are quite early in their time on the board. So let's go Darcie first, please.
Sorry, I was expecting for it to be me first. As Simon's already mentioned, I think speed networking is an amazing space to create those honest and quick conversations.
Brilliant. Pat.
Invest in governance training and give up power, give up control, give students control give them space to control part of the agenda.
Brilliant. Simon.
I think just speak more as human beings to each other, rather than from positions of power or inexperience, inequality.
Stephen.
So I'd advocate for a fundamental cultural shift from thinking that student governors should be allowed to have their say, to actually involving student governors in genuine co-production of university policy. And
Favour, finally to you, please.
Definitely, I completely agree with what Stephen says. A shift in the way the culture of council, openness and clarity is very important, because when people are open and they're clear, people can trust. Student governors can trust, and student governors can believe that they can impact change. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So I will just wrap up by saying thank you to Darcie for all her work on this brilliant and really important report, which I know that I've found incredibly helpful. My thanks to Emma and Carol of HEPI for all the organising, and Charlotte, who is in the background steering us from a technical point of view. Thanks, folks, to all your questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to them, and to all our speakers this morning for their thought-provoking insights. And we will see you soon.